Kia ora everyone and welcome back to Humankind. This is part one of a two-part series where I'm taking an in-depth look and review and analysis of Humankind. This is Humankind the Good. Topics I'm going to cover today include cultures and customization of leadership. I'm going to talk about the Civ-hook and how Humankind leverages off franchises like Civilization. I'm going to talk about city management and outposts, art and UI style, the religious system, the civics tree, and more, some small things that I really like and I think make a big difference. In the other part of this video, the second video, the sister video if you like, Humankind the Bad, I'm going to talk about some frustrations with the combat system, balance synergies, the map wonders, and more. And I'll link that below in the pinned comment and in the video's description, and perhaps even on screen if you want to check out that. Without any further ado, and any further introduction, let's jump into Humankind the Good, my reflections on Humankind, and my review. For starters, I think I really have to talk about citizen management, outposts, and city links. Something I haven't talked about before in my less formal and less reflective videos. So I thought I would start with that. I think that the way that Humankind works with city management is very interesting. It's very similar to the way that we've seen Endless Studios develop their games, Endless Legend, Endless Space, but with a little bit of nuance. So basically in Humankind, you will establish an outpost, and then you can upgrade that outpost into a city once you have enough influence. The city then acts like a city would in any other sort of strategy game where you can build buildings and infrastructure, expand it out with sort of Civ-6 style districts, so on and so forth. You have a cap of the number of cities you can manage, and if you exceed that cap, you start to burn through influence quite quickly, but actually not as quickly as I think it should be. I think that needs to be tweaked in the full game. The way to get around your city cap, which is always displayed up in the top right of the screen, is to effectively, instead of upgrading your outposts into cities, you can link them to existing cities. Basically, it allows you to link outposts and the territories that they've claimed, of course, because each outpost claims a territory on the map. It allows you to link those territories together into one sort of super city. And within that super city, where you have basically one territory that has a city and the rest that have outposts, all of their production can be sort of bundled into one place. So it's a great way to effectively and simply manage cities and territories. Why I think it's such a good element of Humankind, especially as a lifetime Civ player and a player of many other strategy games like Stellaris, Hearts of Iron, Europa Universalis, so on and so forth. I think that this system works really well because it helps to simplify some of the really frustrating and time-consuming parts of city management. Do you have to use it? No, absolutely not. If that's the stuff that you like, go for it. But when you're think about it, you're in the middle of war, you're trying to upgrade your culture or your science, whatever it is you're trying to do, it can be really nice to simplify city production, city management. And I think that's one thing that Humankind does really well. Secondly, I'm going to move on to talking about cultures, okay? Cultures are fundamentally the main part of Humankind, and one of the most significant parts that separates it from other 4X and other strategy games, right? So, as we know, there are 7 eras in the game, and when you progress through each era, providing you make it to the end of the game, of course, you can choose to either transcend within your existing culture, or adopt a new culture. Culture acting like civilizations in Civ 5 or Civ 6, for those of you who are more familiar with those franchises. I have a full guide on Humankind cultures, actually, if you want to check that out, link in the doodly-doo. But basically, you can either stick with your existing culture or move into a new one, and each culture has its own culture trait. That's like your ability. It has its own unique unit. It has its own emblematic quarter. So there's a lot of difference, and I think that the reason why it's so impactful, and I have talked about this before, so I won't dwell on it too long, but I think the reason why it's so impactful is because it helps the gameplay stay fluid and dynamic. If you're bored of your Civ, if you're bored of your culture, you can change it. If you find you need to respond to an emerging challenge, i.e. you're falling behind in science and you're finding yourself out-teched, then you can shift your Civ, your culture, towards one that is more scientifically geared. And then as you move through into the late game, maybe you start, I don't know, maybe there's some border conflicts on a region that you share with a neighbor, and you might want to shift towards a more militaristic, a more expansionist culture, and you can do that. You're not pinned with one unique unit that, let's say it's a unit that applies specifically to the early game, right? Let's say it's some sort of camel archer or catapult or something. In a game where you can't change your civ or culture very easily throughout, you're stuck with it. But actually worse than that, not only are you stuck with it, but actually you end up with just no unique unit at all. If you have an Ancient Era unique unit, once you're beyond the Ancient Era, it becomes either useless or completely redundant and replaced. In this game, you can ensure that you're sort of always having a unique unit and potentially a unique emblematic quarter, a unique building, that's always relevant. And I think that's important as well. Not only is it fluid and dynamic, but it helps keep gameplay relevant. Another sort of aside that I'll tack on here with culture is customization of your leader. It's a small thing, but I haven't talked about it before, and I do think it matters. So you can customize your leader avatar, right? The person who is your leader in the game, you'll see them on the diplomatic screen. In multiplayer, your enemies or allies will see it as well, of course. You can completely customize it. It's made by you. As we understand it, there will be a tiered sort of meta progression unlock system as well. So there's a way that you can customize it to carry some sort of prestige, right? You can customize your character with say a cloak that's only unlocked when you win 10 domination victories or whatever. I'm simplifying it, but it does matter, particularly in the multiplayer environment, I think. Also, it has, as we've seen, enabled some great community integration. We've seen larger content creators, for example, being featured in the game. And I think that's something that we could see moving forward, not just for content creators on YouTube or Twitch, as the Humankind developers seem to favor, but even more than that, right? We can see real-world figures being put in the game, from either historical, political leadership context, or real-world figures from outside of the realm of Twitch as well. So I think that's something really cool, and it's a way that not only we'll be able to see progression as a real thing in the game, as our avatars, and work on them, which helps the player, it helps to keep us interested and engaged, but also I can see it as a great community development tool as well. Next up, one of the real strengths and one of the good things about Humankind, I think, is the way it sort of utilizes what many people will call the Civ-hook. Okay? Allow me to explain. Civilization, a game and a franchise that I have loved for a very long time, and that'll be no secret to long-time viewers and subscribers of the channel, is a very well-established game and a very well-established franchise. And any franchise that can leverage off that interest without just blatantly copying it and doing a bad job is good for the community. It's good for Civ, it's good for other strategy games, and it's good, of course, for Humankind, and us as part of the Humankind community, right? Competition is a good thing. And this can only benefit both franchises as they can learn off each other, I think. I also think that part of the Civ-hook is that ability for us as players of Civ, or whatever other franchise, but I'm choosing Civ in particular because it's so well established. It allows us to particularly, I think, enjoy Humankind and also get a better understanding for Humankind. Yes, it's very different, and there are elements that I'm discussing in this video and others that prove that it is a very different game in many ways, but also, fundamentally, it has that Civ-hook. It has that historical accuracy that I think, as 4X strategy players, we really like. It has that somewhat realistic elements to it in terms of both historical accuracy, but unit strength, map and gameplay development, city spread and urban development. You know, there are lots of reasons, and I think that Humankind leverages off that Civ-hook really well, and I think going forward, that'll be one of the best elements for Humankind, and as I say, other franchises too. Next up, I want to talk about Humankind's art style, and its UI style, which you can see on screen right now. Humankind, I think, and I've touched on this already, so I won't dwell on it too long, but I do think that the Humankind art style looks fantastic, right? This is probably the most modern-looking 4X game we've had in a long time, and of course you might argue, well, you know, Civ hasn't released a new game since 2016, and various other things, but, you know, we have had significant strategy titles release recently. Crusader Kings 3 comes to mind, and others, and I think that Humankind have done a great job at making a really beautiful map. But more than just a beautiful map, it's actually a map that is really easy to use and read. And I think that's where the UI comes in, right? And you can see it really doesn't take long to learn the Humankind UI, that is the user interface. The little things on the screen, the easy ability, for example, to toggle resource icons on and off, and the easy way that they appear on the map, right? They have numbers and little symbols. It's very easy. I think that the UI is also really easy in combat. Another thing that I think about a lot, unit strength and movement is just right there in your face. You can see it. You can see all of their actions on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see how many you've got and all of their abilities. It's very easy and straightforward to understand. Whereas in some other strategy games, you have to dig quite deep to figure out just how much damage your unit is doing, for example, or how much damage the enemy unit might do. Whereas Humankind makes it simple and easy on the eye at the same time. And I think, as I've said before, and I'll say again, I think that matters because we spend a long time looking at this game board, right? 4X strategy games can last hours and hours. You may even be returning to it for repeat sessions. So it matters when it looks good. I think also the smaller details within both the UI and the art style help to shape a more engaging and impactful Humankind experience. For example, if you zoom in on the map, you can see, not even that far, you can see animals moving around the agricultural sector, little human beings walking around and doing their thing, and while those details might seem trivial, and in many ways they are, it helps to provide a more complete, well-rounded, and I think satisfying experience for the player. And I will probably, realistically, be spending hundreds of hours looking at this game. I don't know about you. So for me, that does matter, and that does impact my experience. Next up, I want to get a little bit more technical and talk about the Civics tree in Humankind. The Civics tree here is sort of an RPG-style branching tree where you have 6 or 7 different branches, and you can choose to adopt civics as you move through the game using influence. Civics, for those unfamiliar, are... how could I describe them? They're similar to the cultural tree in Civilization 6. They are civic actions that you can take as a governor using your influence to impact the way that your culture and your society transforms and changes over time. Each civic, as you'll see, impacts the overall, how should I say, it impacts the overall nature of society. So if you enact a civic that is perhaps leaning on the, let's say, the tradition tree, right? Let's say it's a really progressive civic. You're saying, one example that pops to mind is an in-game event will come up and it'll prompt you to decide whether you want male religious leaders, female religious leaders, or both in your civilization. This is something that in the real world, of course, religions, civic leaders and cultures have grappled with, is who ought to lead religions, who can lead, what genders or what have you can lead them. And that's something that personally I'm not particularly fazed about, but many people are, and that's totally fine. And so the way that the game goes about it is they've put that in the civic as a civics choice for you to make, a decision, right? Because these are always decisions, they're always trade-offs on the civics tree. You're choosing to lean towards tradition and say, in this example, that religious leaders must be men, rather than leading towards progression and saying religious leaders can be any gender. Now that matters because that will impact your society in different ways. If you lean towards tradition, that may provide more stability in food, whereas if you lean towards a more progressive civic, that may provide a flat bonus to science at the cost of stability. So that it's really important, and it's a really intricate and detailed system, but it's presented in a way that is so, again, so user-friendly, so easy to read and understand. The little bars that show you where you're moving on the scale of, say, tradition to progressiveness, or a closed economy to an open economy, a more communist government versus a more open democratic government. The way that it's laid out is really easy to read, and once you understand the yields in the game, you'll understand it easily. And also the wider tree, as I say, it has a real sort of RPG feel to it, which is a much better way of doing it than just a generic tree, right? We have a science tree in this game. It's nice that we don't just have another culture tree. And so I really applaud Humankind for developing civics, which are, basically the laws and customs of society, in a way that's really engaging for us as game players, but also as viewers. I think it's really interesting to watch. Finally, to sort of bring this video to a close, I'm going to talk about just some of the small things that I think Humankind does really well. I think that Humankind does religion quite well. Now, this is not a small thing, but it does deserve its own video, so I'm going to put it into this category. It's relatively easy to implement. The religious upgrades are quite easy to understand as well. There are a few tenets. They're really straightforward. Their benefits are really straightforward. The religious overview, the sort of map lens, is brilliant as well. You can really easily see where your religion is, where it isn't, and how quickly it's going to spread. And some of the other small things that I enjoy, I like the fact that boats sink when they're in open water in the early game. That's a nice little historical accurate, that they sort of, they degrade over time, they lose health, they suffer illness. I think that's really cool. I like the fact that we actually embark units into ships, and then we can disembark units off ships, instead of having to just like awkwardly overlap a naval unit with a land unit. It's really nice, and something so simple that I really enjoy. And also I think just in general, unit movement as a whole in this game is nice and fluid, it's dynamic, it feels modern, and it's really easy to read and understand, just like the combat mechanics. And aside from those mechanics, really the last thing that I'd like to cover, and something that I think no one's talking about, is this, the end screen. It's actually fantastic. You get a playthrough of what you did in each era. You can see which era stars you contributed to the most, so you might be like, wow, I unlocked a lot of technologies that era, or I destroyed a lot of units that era. Whatever it might be, you get to see the culture that you adopted at each stage. You can see here it's playing through what I did, it's playing through how much era score I got as well, which of course determines victory. So you can see as well which eras you performed best in and which you didn't. And then of course once it goes through your game, you can actually go through and see all of the enemy players' ones as well. So you can see what they did in each era, what they earned, what they didn't, so on and so forth. Lastly, also, it does finish off with some numbers and some statistics. And whether you're a numbers person or not, I feel like even if you don't fully understand the R value or what have you, you fundamentally get a really good picture for how you did in terms of score or science or military. The end game graphs tell a really fantastic story, and I think that Humankind does a great job at displaying it, not only with these beautiful visuals as we see each leader, we can see, to go back to some of the things I talked about earlier in the video, you can see what they're wearing, how they're customized. In single player that may not matter unless you're playing against real world content creators or historical figures, but in multiplayer as well, showing off your gear and your sort of avatar and your character and who you built up, it's cool and it matters, and it's something that I think is both presented visually and graphically in a way that is really easy to read and understand, but also it's something that I think just does a really great job to cap the experience. And while I'll talk a little bit in the sister video about how I find the game is less interesting and enjoyable in the mid to late game, I think this is a wonderful way to conclude the game. And that concludes this video, as luck would have it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please do consider subscribing and joining our little community, and I'll see you next time.